My boss demoted me, called me the asset, replaced me with my trainee. So I walked out, took the clients, and watched collapse from a window seat. I felt at the moment I stepped inside the kind of shift in the air that tells your gut something is about to go wrong before your brain catches up. It wasn't dramatic or loud, just a subtle tightening, like the walls of conference room 5C had already made up their mind before I even crossed the threshold. I had walked into a lot of meetings at Veridon Metrics over the past 5 years, but this one felt different, quiet, still, like a closing act that hadn't announced itself yet. The door shut behind me at exactly 8:45 a.m., and I remember the click sounding louder than usual. I'd spent the night before prepping my case, gathering metrics, assembling wins, making peace with asking for what I'd earned. Not even asking, really, just asserting a fact. I had delivered results that no one else in the company came close to matching, and I was ready for the next level. Mara was already seated at the table. Her posture was too perfect, stiff in a way I hadn't seen since we were both interns in Milwaukee back in 2010. For context, Mara and I used to grab drinks after 10 p.m. deadlines, swap stories about burnt-out execs and doomed presentations, cry over divorces, and share playlists we swore would save each other's lives. That woman wasn't sitting across from me today. Next to her was a man I barely knew, Clyde, the new VP from some Silicon Valley startup, slick as oil and about half as warm. He'd only been at Veridon for 3 months, hadn't led a single client call, and yet somehow now had the authority to restructure my life. He didn't waste time. No pleasantries, no performance review chatter, no context. Just flipped open a folder like he was dealing with utility bills and said, "Nina, there's been a strategic shift in how we handle high-tier client management." I waited, blinking once, twice, preparing for what should have followed. Maybe a new title, an expanded team, a cross-regional leadership pilot. Instead, effective immediately, you'll transition to the role of associate liaison under internal accounts. There was a pause so thick it might have suffocated someone less practiced in swallowing fury. I smiled, barely. "I'm sorry, could you repeat that?" Clyde nodded, not even bothering to make eye contact. "You'll be assisting Denise on domestic portfolio transition." Denise. As in the intern I trained 2 summers ago, the one who asked me if liaison was spelled with AZ. I turned to Mara, looking for a lifeline, maybe a twitch of regret, but her face remained porcelain smooth, like she'd taken a seminar on neutrality. "There's a revised compensation package," Clyde added, sliding a sealed envelope across the table like we were finalizing a cable bill, not rewriting my career. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. The number was visible through the paper just enough to catch a slashed line. It was down 40%. I didn't scream. I didn't argue. Instead, I looked straight ahead and said, "Understood." Then I stood up, adjusted the cuffs of my navy jacket, and left behind a version of myself in that room, one who still believed that excellence guaranteed anything more than convenience. I didn't remember walking back to the parking garage, but I do remember the moment my fingers hit the steering wheel and the sob rose so fast it stole all the air from my lungs. The silence in my car felt louder than any explosion. I cried the way you cry when the grief has no single name, long, buried, and all-consuming. I kept my head against the leather seat as the clock blinked past 9 a.m., as if time cared whether I had just been erased. All I could think about was the night I flew out to Oregon with 40 minutes notice to save the Kepler account, slept in a hotel with a broken heater, wore the same blouse for 2 days, and still managed to get their executive board to sign a renewed $18 million deal. I remembered the time I missed Jonah's birthday because the Redmont servers crashed 3 hours before their earnings call. He didn't even cry when I told him I couldn't come, just nodded, like he already knew this was how it would always be. I took out my phone, maybe hoping that something, anything, would anchor me. Instead, I saw a message from Leah, one of my former mates. "Hey Nina, someone from Ops said you're off Verimax and the Euromed project? Tell me that's not real." I didn't respond. I didn't even know yet. But now I did. They'd stripped my accounts before they told me. Made the calls, shifted the decks, reorganized the plays like I was just a placeholder to delete and replace. No farewell, no discussion, no transition memo. My hand shook as I scrolled to my inbox. I don't know why I opened the message from Mara. Maybe I thought she would explain herself, that somewhere inside her a trace of our friendship remained. Instead, What I found was an email chain I wasn't supposed to see. She had forwarded me the wrong thread, one between her, Clyde, and a director from corporate named Darren. The subject line was internal alignment strategy. One sentence burned itself into my memory so deeply I think I'll still hear it when I'm old and gray. We finally neutralized her influence across the external portfolio. Neutralized. Like I was a threat to be contained. Like 5 years of unwavering performance, of sacrifices nobody saw, of phone calls taken from airports and funerals, meant nothing except inconvenience to the new brass. The next message made it worse. Darren replied, with her shifted off the grid, "We can centralize all global client control under Clyde. Tell Mara she did well. No pushback expected." I stopped breathing. My heart didn't just sink, it broke in half and sank with it. And then came the final nail. Clyde, the man who hadn't looked me in the eye once that morning, replied, "Going forward, let's avoid using names and documentation. Refer to her as the asset. Not Nina. Not she. Just the asset." I was no longer a person in their language. I had become a line item, an overhead reduction, a whisper they could pretend never existed. I forwarded that entire thread to myself, and then to Ken, who once told me if I ever needed a parachute, he'd pull the cord. He hadn't been on any of those emails. They didn't know he was still loyal. Maybe they forgot. Maybe they thought no one noticed the fixer, the one who solved without spotlight. They were wrong. I may have been erased from their plans, but they were about to learn. I could write my own. I didn't sleep that night. Not even a little. My body was still, but my mind kept pacing circles inside itself, replaying every sentence from that email chain like some kind of punishment loop. The words weren't fading. They were getting louder. Neutralized. No pushback expected. The asset. I'd read them so many times the screen had practically burned them into my vision. Around 4 a.m., I sat on the kitchen floor, back against the cabinets, wrapped in an old blanket like it could protect me from the reality clawing at my spine. My laptop was still open on the counter, screen dimmed, cursor blinking on an empty email I hadn't managed to send. I don't know what held me back. Maybe I was waiting for rage to cool into clarity. Or maybe I wanted to make sure every move I made next came from strategy, not fury. Because what they'd done to me wasn't just unprofessional, it was calculated, deliberate, cruel. It wasn't a restructure. It was an execution in silence. I was the body they buried under a non-disclosure agreement and hoped no one would notice missing. By 8 a.m., the sun was bleeding through the windows like it hadn't just watched me unravel for hours. I stood, poured a cup of coffee I never planned to drink, and finally typed a message short, clinical, cold. I addressed it to Clyde, Mara, and HR. I BCC'd 5 clients who'd trusted me with sensitive data, midnight crises, impossible timelines, and who had, until yesterday, believed I was still their lead. The subject line was one word: resignation. The body? Even shorter. Effective immediately, I will not be returning. That was all. No explanation. No apology. No emotion. Just fact, like the ones I used to lead within boardrooms. I hit send. Then I closed the laptop like I was sealing a coffin. Not mine, theirs. It took less than 15 minutes. First came the calls. Then the messages. My phone lit up like someone had set it on fire. I ignored them all. Clyde's came first, predictably sterile. Let's discuss. No need for rash decisions. He still thought I needed his permission to be angry. Mara's message came next. Longer, Messier. You blindsided us. This isn't how I wanted things to go. She'd switched from puppet master to victim so fast I almost admired the whiplash. HR chimed in with their scripted reply, asking me to confirm my last working day. But it was the client messages that finally made me exhale. Campbell, who ran Verimax, replied first. We were not informed. If Nina is no longer managing our systems, this contract is on pause. Jasmine from Petrolin wrote next, more direct. Please confirm this isn't real. If it is, we're reviewing our relationship. Then Owen, CoreLogic's director, texted, call me. I don't trust what I'm hearing. They weren't just confused, they were furious. And for once, not at me. I knew what was happening. My silence had broken the illusion. Clyde and Mara had been hoping I'd disappear with a whimper, not detonate the web of relationships they'd taken for granted. I had never bragged, never played political games, but every one of those clients had my personal number, knew my voice, trusted me because I had earned that trust one red-eye flight, one 3 a.m. troubleshooting call at a time. Around 10:30 a.m., my inbox pinged again. A message from Arnold in Frankfurt, COO of Solix Med, my most high-maintenance, high-value client. Subject, just so you know. I opened it slowly, hands shaking even though I didn't want them to. The email contained only one sentence: "We work with people, not policies." Beneath it was an image, his assistant holding a partially printed contract in front of their headquarters. The logo on top wasn't Veridon's. It was Harwick Solutions. That photo hit harder than anything anyone could have said. It wasn't just about me anymore. The dominoes were falling, and I wasn't the one trembling. I forwarded the image to Ken with no caption. He'd understand. He always had. I stood up from the kitchen stool, stretched my arms, and let the breath out slowly through my nose. Something shifted in me, something deeper than anger, quieter than pain. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was repositioning. That afternoon, I dressed with intention. Soft blue sweater, clean lines, nothing corporate. Nothing that reeked of apology. Then I gathered my notes, backed up my files, and took a train across the city, not because I had somewhere to be, but because movement felt like control. I sat at a quiet cafe in the River District, just long enough to catch my reflection in the window worn, sure, but sharper than I'd seen in months. At 4:10 p.m., I stepped inside an office that wasn't mine yet. I texted Tess that morning. She hadn't responded with words, just sent a calendar invite marked private. We hadn't spoken in over a year, not since she'd offered me a role at Thorn and Vale and I turned it down to stay loyal to Veridon. Loyalty. What a wasted currency. The meeting room had floor-to-ceiling glass, a view of the skyline like a promise someone actually planned to keep. Tess looked up from her tablet when I entered and said, "I heard about the storm." I didn't smile. "It's not over yet." She nodded. "We've got space. And budget. And clients already asking where you're going." I sat down across from her and didn't hesitate. "I'm not job hunting. I'm building." She raised an eyebrow. "Then let's build." I left that meeting with no offer letter, no title, just intent. I didn't need their permission anymore. I had leverage, and they had vacancy. That night, I slept. Not long, but better. The kind of sleep that comes after a long fight when the battle's not over, but your armor finally fits. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't bracing for impact, I was aiming. The next morning, I didn't even set an alarm. I didn't need to. My brain woke me up before daylight, running at full speed before I even opened my eyes. There was a strange stillness in my apartment, like the silence after a fire's gone out, where the air still remembers what burned. I walked barefoot to the kitchen, poured water into the coffee pot, then stood there watching it boil without hearing a sound. My phone buzzed once on the counter, then again, then a third time before I finally picked it up. 37 notifications. Half of them unread emails, the rest a storm of messages from names I hadn't seen pop up in months. People were reacting, scrambling, speculating, unraveling, but I didn't open anything yet. I needed a moment longer to stay anchored, to remember I had already left that burning building. Whatever they were doing now wasn't my problem, not anymore. I finally tapped into the emails, one by one. The first subject line came from Clyde, tone almost comical in its fake professionalism. "Elena, we believe there's still room to discuss your transition. Please advise." I didn't reply. The next one was from Mara. "You've put me in an impossible position. I never wanted it to happen like this." I skimmed, rolled my eyes, then archived it without reading further. HR's message followed, cold and procedural. "We're formally acknowledging your resignation. Please confirm your preferred exit logistics for equipment and ID clearance." They were pretending I'd left quietly. They were still hoping I'd vanish like a polite memory. But the next batch of messages came from people who actually mattered. Clients who had every reason to be furious, not at me, but at Veridon. Campbell wrote again. "We're suspending all activity until leadership explains your departure." Owen followed. "They're spinning a narrative we don't believe. I've requested a full internal audit of the contract transfer." Then came Jasmine, short and savage. "If you're gone, so are we." Every message felt like a stone being laid behind me, brick by brick building a wall I would never cross again. Then, buried deep in the thread stack, was the one that made everything stop for a moment. It was from Arnold again, the COO in Frankfurt. Attached was a photo taken from inside their headquarters, one of their assistants mid-swipe as a fresh contract printed from their industrial machine. This one had the letterhead of Harwick Solutions, signed already at the bottom. The caption underneath was just 5 words. Some losses are irreversible, Clyde. I sat back in my chair, the phone still in my hand, feeling the exact moment when something inside Veridon snapped. Because it wasn't about me anymore, it was about trust. And that was something they couldn't fix with promotions, press releases, or NDAs. By noon, the internal dominoes had started collapsing. Ken forwarded me a screenshot from a Slack channel where junior staff were whispering in frantic threads about what was happening. Does anyone know why Westfield's account got pulled? Someone had asked. Another replied, heard client side got cold feet after Nina left. Legal's in overdrive. A third chimed in, Mara's been in back-to-back calls since yesterday. Clyde's office door hasn't opened all morning. I didn't smile. Not out of coldness, but because it wasn't funny. It was predictable. And I had warned them 1,000 quiet times without ever raising my voice. Then, around 1:30 p.m., my phone rang again. The caller ID stopped me mid-step. It was Malcolm, CEO of Veridon. The man who'd never said my name once during a quarterly meeting, who nodded at my ideas only when someone else repeated them louder. I stared at the screen for 5 seconds, then answered. Malcolm, I said flatly, waiting. His voice was smoother than I remembered, dipped in fake warmth. Elena, I won't pretend we handled things perfectly yesterday. What happened was avoidable. You deserved better. I waited, saying nothing. He kept going, trying to talk like this was a shared misunderstanding instead of corporate sabotage. I want to make this right, he said, then listed off a string of shiny offers, a new title, direct reporting to him, a 6-figure retention bonus, flexible terms, a private statement to reshape the narrative. The way he said it, you'd think he was offering gold, but I could hear the panic behind every word. He wasn't protecting me. He was protecting what I represented. The shield between Veridon and the clients who had started to vanish like coins dropped through cracks. We can present this as a miscommunication, he offered. A strategic misstep that's already been corrected. We just need you to agree not to escalate further. I took a deep breath and said, if this conversation happened 2 days ago, I might have listened. But now, I've seen the foundation. And I'm not stepping back into a building I watched catch fire. There was a long pause on the other end. Then his voice shifted again, colder this time. You're making a permanent decision off temporary emotion. I almost laughed. No, Malcolm. I made a permanent decision after 5 years of temporary silence. Then I hung up. I took the next hour to gather the last things from my desk. I didn't ask for clearance or send a courtesy note. I simply walked through the front doors like a guest, not an employee, and rode the elevator to the 12th floor. No one stopped me. The office smelled exactly the same, filtered air, bad coffee, old printer ink, but it didn't feel like mine anymore. I opened my drawer, took the few things I had left, then zipped up my bag slowly, methodically. Clyde appeared just as I was slipping my laptop into the case. Can we talk? He asked, neutral but strained. I gave him 5 minutes. We sat in the small glass conference room where all this had begun. He opened with more fake diplomacy. We'd like to avoid further disruption. I think there's a way to exit with grace. I pulled a folder from my tote, slid it across the table. He opened it, I scanning the top lines. It was my original employment contract. Section 14B, non-compete clause. The one that stated clearly, in the event of involuntary demotion or salary reduction not agreed upon in writing, this clause becomes void. I leaned back, which means I'm free to work with any of your competitors. Immediately, without restriction, and legally. Clyde's face shifted for the first time. His jaw tensed. That clause was never flagged. I shrugged. Your legal team should read slower. He tried to recover, defaulting back to threats disguised as concern. You don't want to escalate this further, Elena. I smiled, just barely. It already escalated. You just didn't notice until the walls cracked. When I left, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The doors had already closed, and this time, I wasn't the one left behind. The email started before sunrise. I hadn't set an alarm, hadn't planned to wake up early, but something inside me pulled me out of bed by instinct alone. The air outside was still dark, the streetlights flickering like they were trying to stay awake just a little longer. I moved through my apartment like a ghost, coffee brewing, lights low, curtains half drawn. When I finally picked up my phone, it was vibrating nonstop. 12 unread messages, then 15, then 20. I opened the first, then the second, then stopped counting entirely because the subject lines all told the same story in different fonts. Termination of services. One from Westfield, another from Petrolin, then Solixmed, then CoreLogic. All of them pulling out, not asking for clarification, just leaving, contracts canceled, relationships dissolved. They weren't making threats or setting conditions. They weren't negotiating for my return. They were simply stating facts. My presence was non-negotiable, and without me, there was nothing left to salvage. I sat at the kitchen counter with my untouched coffee and stared at the screen as message after message poured in. Westfield's letter was a single sentence. Trust is not transferable. Petrolin was more pointed, referencing strategic instability, a lack of leadership, and a decision made without consultation. But CoreLogic's message hit the hardest. We do not invest in companies. We invest in people. And the person we trusted is no longer with you. That line sat in my chest like a stone. It wasn't ego, it was proof. Proof that every sleepless night, every impossible deadline, every moment I bit my tongue in meetings just to keep peace, had actually mattered to someone. They tried to write me out quietly, like I was just another internal shift, but the people I'd worked for had noticed. They'd felt the silence like a vacuum. I opened LinkedIn without meaning to, out of habit more than curiosity. The top post had over 10,000 reactions and was climbing every minute. It was from Olivia at CoreLogic, someone I'd only met in person twice but had worked closely with for over 2 years. She wrote, "The reason we stayed with Veridon wasn't their tech or pricing. It was Elena, the person who picked up the phone at 1 a.m., who never passed blame, who never said, 'Not my job.' She was our anchor. Wherever she lands next, we follow." I scrolled through the comments. Some were from peers, some from competitors, and a few clearly from current Veridon employees using fake profiles to speak without risk. One comment read, "They're already holding emergency calls. Bryce looks like he hasn't slept." Another said, "Mara's name is being tossed around in blame meetings like a frisbee." Then one more, "HR is drowning in NDA revisions. No one's signing anything." I didn't post anything. I didn't comment. I just watched it all unfold like a slow-motion collapse in a building I used to call home. The most surreal part was how little I had done to start it. No expose, no interview, no lawsuit. Just a resignation and 5 BCCs to the right people. That was it. And still, the aftershocks were spreading like a fault line had ruptured beneath them. Not because I was irreplaceable, but because they built an entire operation on a foundation of silence. And the moment I broke it, everything else began to shake. By 9 a.m., another message arrived, this one from Ava, a junior associate I'd once defended during a Q4 crisis when Mara tried to throw her under the bus for a client deck that I had actually rewritten last minute. Her message was simple. "They're trying to change the story. But we remember. I just wanted to say thank you for protecting us. For showing us how to walk away without burning down the room." I stared at the screen for a long time after that one. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I finally realized I didn't need to say anything at all. My silence had become its own message. Not submission, not retreat, just proof that I didn't owe them more than they gave me. By noon, I was sitting in a cab across the river, headed to Thorne and Vale's offices for a follow-up with Tess. She hadn't pressured me after our last meeting, hadn't even followed up with a calendar request, just left the door open and waited. When I arrived, I was escorted to the same glass-walled conference room with its skyline view and espresso machine that actually worked. Tess was already there, reviewing a client list on a tablet. She looked up and smiled like she'd been expecting me all along. "You ready to make it official?" she asked. I sat down, opened the folder I'd brought, and placed it in front of her. Inside were handwritten notes, client histories, contact protocols, preferences, pain points, all committed to memory over years of work. "I don't want to inherit someone else's structure," I said. "I want to build the one that should have existed." She nodded, then slid a printed offer letter across the table. It was everything we discussed and more. Full autonomy, head of strategic partnerships, full discretion over team hires, and a sign-on package that made it clear they valued not just my skills, but the storm I had just walked out of. I didn't sign right away. I told her I needed to do one more thing. I returned to Veridon later that afternoon, not through the front entrance, not into meetings or offices, just to the 12th floor to collect my final box. It was symbolic more than necessary. As I walked past the reception desk, the woman behind it looked up nervously, clearly briefed. "Are you here to see someone?" she asked. "No," I said gently. "Just collecting what's mine." As I packed the last items from my drawer, an old client award, a notebook I'd filled with mid-flight brainstorming, a single framed photo of my son, I saw Mara approach from the corner of my eye. "Elena," she said, voice low, almost unsure of itself. I didn't turn. "I'm busy, Mara." She stepped closer. I didn't know they were going to do it like that. I swear. I thought I cut her off. "You signed off. I saw the email. You didn't resist. You complied." She said nothing for a long moment. Then, finally, I was afraid. "He said if I didn't agree, I'd be next." I nodded once. "Then you made your choice." "So did I." I walked past her without waiting for a response. Just before I reached the elevator, I passed Bryce. His expression was unreadable. An executive face, so overused it had become hollow. "Can we talk?" he asked. I paused. "You've got 3 minutes." We stepped into an empty meeting room, and he launched into damage control. "We're losing contracts. The board's asking questions. This is escalating." I didn't react. He tried a softer approach. "You made your point, but we can still shape the narrative, minimize damage." I dropped a second folder onto the table. This one had the non-compete clause from my contract, highlighted clearly. "You voided this the moment you demoted me without consent. I'm legally free to work with anyone, including your competitors." Effective immediately. Bryce's jaw tightened. This wasn't flagged. I smiled faintly. "No, but I did. And you ignored it." I turned to leave, then looked back one final time. This wasn't revenge. This was balance. And then I walked away, knowing he understood what that really meant. It didn't feel like a Monday. The light outside was gentler than usual, the kind that creeps in slowly instead of snapping you awake. I stood by the window for a long time, watching the city stretch into itself, taxis blinking at red lights, people walking fast with coffee in one hand and fatigue in the other. My phone had already buzzed half a dozen times, but I hadn't touched it. Not out of avoidance, but because I knew exactly what I'd find. The damage was still rolling through Veridon like a slow earthquake. Clients were pulling contracts, team leads were panicking, and someone somewhere was probably drafting a memo that would never be sent. I finally checked the screen around 7:15 a.m. 6 new messages from internal sources, 2 from old clients, and 1 from someone I hadn't heard from in weeks. It was from Mara. The subject line was just one word: "Sorry." I didn't open it immediately. Instead, I walked to the kitchen, poured my coffee, took a breath, and tried to remember how normal felt before everything burned down. I sat on the stool by the window and finally tapped the message open. Her words were shorter this time, not performative, not dramatic, just tired. "I made the wrong choice. I thought I was protecting myself, but all I did was shrink. You didn't deserve what happened. I hope whatever you're building next is everything we both dreamed of. I'm proud of you, even if I don't deserve to say it." I stared at the screen for a few seconds longer, then deleted it. Not out of anger, out of clarity. Some things don't need a response to be understood. By 8:30 a.m., I was walking into the glass lobby of Thorn and Vale. No fanfare, no cameras, just my name already on the welcome screen, blinking softly beside the words "Strategic Partnerships, Executive Suite." The receptionist nodded as I passed, the same way you greet someone who belongs. I stepped into my new office, sleek, clean, minimal. The view overlooked the river, and for the first time in 5 years, I didn't feel like I was entering a battlefield. I opened my laptop, entered my login credentials, and let the dashboard load. 5 client windows were already queued for a kickoff Zoom call: Petrolin, Westfield, CoreLogic, SolixMed, and Verimax. They'd followed me without hesitation. No persuasion, no promises, just trust, moving quietly from one shore to the next. But before that call, I had somewhere else to be. I closed the laptop, grabbed my coat, and walked 3 blocks to the local elementary school. The auditorium smelled like pencil shavings and construction paper and fresh polish, the kind of smell you only notice when you're not thinking about deadlines. I took a seat in the fourth row, glanced at the program, then looked up as the lights dimmed. My son walked out with his class, eyes scanning the audience. And then, when he saw me, fully present, not half distracted or checking my watch, he smiled. Not because I was powerful or respected or important, but because I was there. That one small expression undid something I hadn't even realized was still twisted inside me. The version of me who always chose work first was gone now. Not punished, not broken, just done. By 9:45 a.m., I was back at my desk. The client call was about to start. The room was quiet except for the faint hum of the city outside and the subtle click of the clock on the wall. I opened Zoom, adjusted the camera, and waited as 5 windows filled with familiar faces, some smiling, some serious, all waiting for me to lead. I straightened my posture and greeted them like I had hundreds of times before. Only now there was no one hovering behind the scenes to control the narrative. This was mine. No middlemen, no hidden strings. Just strategy, trust, and ownership. "Good morning," I said calmly. "Let's build something better." And we did. Not with fanfare or dramatic declarations, but with steady hands and focused minds. I chose my team carefully, hired people who had been overlooked, underappreciated, and boxed into roles they never fit. I created a structure where transparency wasn't a buzzword and credit wasn't hoarded like currency. We built systems that didn't just solve problems, they anticipated them. Clients who had once been hesitant to trust again were calling us first now. Not because we were cheaper or faster, but because we treated them like partners instead of accounts. Meanwhile, Veridon was still unraveling. Their stock had dropped just under 4%. Legal was spinning in circles. Leadership changes were rumored but not confirmed. Someone leaked internal Slack screenshots to a trade blog. One post went viral under the headline, "When Silence Becomes Strategy, the Elena Effect." I didn't respond to it. I didn't post anything. I didn't need to. The story was already being told, not by me, but by the people who saw what happened and chose to speak. I heard from Ken a few weeks later. He'd left Veridon quietly and joined another firm. He sent me a short message. "I've never seen leadership fold so fast. They're still trying to patch the hole you left." I thanked him, then sent him a list of names I was considering for my expansion team. By the end of that month, 3 of them were on board. We didn't build fast, we built right. Thoughtfully, intentionally, with enough strength in the foundation that no one person could collapse it overnight. The work was hard, but it was clean. The kind of hard that makes you proud, not the kind that grinds you into resentment. I received one last message from Bryce. It arrived on a Thursday evening, timestamped just before midnight. "If you're still monitoring this inbox, I just want to say I underestimated you." We all did. I didn't reply. He didn't deserve an echo. Some people think revenge is loud, explosive, public. But I've learned that the quietest exits often leave the deepest fractures. I didn't need to destroy anyone. I just needed to reclaim myself and let the silence speak. Every time a contract landed in my inbox, every time a former colleague asked to join, every time a client thanked me for showing up like I always had, that was my response. That was my closure. And when I think back now, I don't remember the conference room or the envelope or the betrayal. I remember the morning light in my apartment. I remember my son's smile from the fourth row. I remember the first Zoom call where my name was at the top of the screen, not buried in a CC line. And I remember the sound of my own voice saying, "Let's begin," like I'd waited years to finally speak in my own language. So if you're reading this, and you've ever felt like the walls were closing in, that your value was being measured in silence, that your work was being forgotten the moment it was done, let this be proof. You don't need permission to leave. You don't need to beg for recognition. You don't need to scorch the earth behind you. Just walk. Steady. Clear. Sure. Because some storms don't come with thunder. Some storms whisper and still bring everything down.